The hour of the caste. If Javier Milei was effective in something, it was in developing a concept that allowed him to align the entire society against a common enemy to which he attributed all the country's evils. This concept, originating from India, where it describes very close social groups, is that of the caste. Today, we are going to show how the caste is financed and where it obtains part of the funds without citizens being able to do anything about it. Taxpayer money goes straight to them, hidden in a legal maze that not just anyone can access or decipher, but once discovered, it will become clear not only who is behind it, but also how they defend those incomes using citizens as cover. But who are the caste in Argentina? Some initial answers were revealed when, during the campaign events, Milei rallied his followers with the chant, "The caste is afraid. The caste is afraid." And feeling targeted, the now former President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner responded defiantly.
Esos mamarrachos que andan diciendo que la casta tiene miedo. ¿De qué tiene miedo? Si nunca te pasó nada, hermano. ¿Qué me venís a joder con que te tenemos miedo? ¿De dónde te tenemos miedo? ¿De dónde?
But despite the power held by someone who was president twice and also vice president of the last government, she failed to hide the enormous unjustified wealth or avoid accumulating cases of corruption and illicit enrichment. Even during her own government, she received the first judicial conviction for the crime of fraudulent administration, making it clear that she is a key figure in the so-called caste. But is Kirchnerism the caste? No. Argentina's economic debacle dates back many years, and many more sectors and political parties are involved. Regardless of who was in power from the government, they are always the beneficiaries. Politicians and their circles have been enriching themselves progressively for several decades. And although political parties alternate in power, the population has been getting poorer without being able to prevent it. Argentines know it and suffer from it, but their complaints have no evolution, not even in the country's judiciary. Since 2001, they have been telling the political class they all must go in a phrase that remained just a slogan of the time. Because while the population protested and demonstrated in front of banks, the government authorized them to confiscate the population's savings in a blatant theft that shows the impunity of those who exercise power. As there was no restitution of the money, no one was held responsible for it, and the country ended up having 5 presidents in 1 week. And if anyone believes that after that painful national experience, Argentines managed to reverse the situation, the truth is, they did not. The caste is so powerful that it is practically untouchable. A large part of the Argentine political class comes to power not out of a sense of service, but to save themselves and their surroundings. Javier Milei, in his solitary battle, first gained space in political programs in traditional media, then won 2 seats in the Chamber of Deputies, later managed to obtain votes as a presidential candidate in the PASO elections, and finally reached a runoff in which he prevailed with a respectable difference, becoming the president of his country. Throughout the process, his discourse was to straighten out the economy and fight the caste. His overwhelming leadership and the enormous capacity demonstrated in advancing what he was saying are truly remarkable. He went from being a media economist to contesting nothing less than the presidency of his country and winning it. It is clear that underestimating him is not advisable. Milei advanced on the path he proposed and even made it clear who the caste were.
A ver, el ejemplo más rimbombante en esto es el presidente. El presidente es el rey de la casta. No están solo los políticos ladrones ahí. Hay otra parte de la casta, también están los empresarios. Es decir, que son los empresarios prebendarios. Nosotros decimos empresarios.
He assumed the presidency with just a small group of people who had been accompanying him. And as they were not enough to cover all the positions and roles involved in the functioning of the state, he had to focus on the strategy of attracting qualified and experienced human resources to guarantee the efficiency and capacity necessary to manage a state, which he reduced from 18 to 9 ministries. He had already anticipated during the campaign that those who decided to join the liberal transformation project and help the country move forward would be welcome regardless of where they come from, and he would make a clean slate with their past.
Y estoy dispuesto a hacer tabula rasa, barajar y dar de nuevo con el objetivo de terminar con el kirchnerismo.
This opening strategy allowed the incorporation of some suitable figures who were part of other governments and now belong to his, such as Patricia Bullrich in the Ministry of Security, Luis Petri as Minister of Defense, Osvaldo Giordano as head of ANSES, and Daniel Scioli, whom he appointed Secretary of Tourism, Sports, and Environment. These measures generated great criticism in society and among his own voters, who wondered if the president really wants to fight the caste or be part of it.
Porque una Argentina distinta es imposible con los mismos de siempre.
And it is truly confusing to understand because many Argentine media outlets, from which Milei removed advertising revenue for a year, are readjusting their editorial position towards the government, and in the information they broadcast, it is clearly distinguished that some are in favor and others are absolutely against it, making it difficult to find balanced positions. A sector of the country's press, more aligned with the ideas of the previous government and the so-called progressive sectors, is stirring up public opinion to resist the shock adjustment plan that was announced during the campaign, and the people, even knowing it, voted for it. In previous governments, they received a large part of the official advertising revenue and developed what they themselves call militant journalism, which was paid for by the government and aimed at speaking well of its management. The so-called envelope journalists were also identified within the caste. On the other side, another group of media outlets more linked to the business world expressed themselves in the opposite position, showing only advantages in the model, and in the end, each seems to communicate to try to convince its specific audience without finding objective parameters. Argentines call this information opposition the rift. In the first 60 days of government, the economic measures were very harsh on the population's pocket, which is struggling to assimilate the changes because on top of the existing inflation, there was a currency devaluation that reduced purchasing power, leading to a contraction in economic activity. Commercial activity in all sectors plummeted, dragging down the economy with it. Some media outlets argued that the promised shock was cleansing the economy, while others claimed that the people were being starved. Officially, from the government itself, it was communicated that ministries were downsized, contracts that expired were not renewed, personnel was reduced in most state areas, unjustified overtime was cancelled, and the extensive fleet of cars and drivers available to government officials was being disposed of. The president and his entourage traveled abroad on commercial flights, suspended the use of the Tango 01 plane and the helicopter, and on trips, the much smaller entourage stayed in hotels that cost 4 times less than those used by their predecessors in the same city. The announced chainsaw plan is cutting unnecessary expenses from all state accounts and removing from the payroll any employee who was listed but did not perform any duties. The political caste lived very well at the expense of taxpayers who paid their taxes. The magnitude of expenses, services, and contracted tenders that officials had evidenced a lifestyle full of privileges that did not match the reality of an economically bankrupt country. The Union Caste was one of the sectors that benefited the most at the expense of the workers they theoretically represented, amid governments that caused unemployment without strikes, complaints, or criticisms. With benefits through a compulsory union fee and the management of the million-dollar coffers of social works, their leaders managed internal statutes to ensure they were always re-elected to their positions, remaining in them for more than 30 years, as shown in our previous report that you can consult if interested, without allowing renewal in their ranks. This part of the caste that remains entrenched in the leadership of the unions prevents companies from developing, growing, and generating more jobs because they extort those who invest to obtain their share. They directly harm workers and consequently the entire country. Luis Barrionuevo acknowledged on a television program in 1986 that for the country to move forward, we have to stop stealing for 2 years.
Esto es lo que sirve, y que hay que entenderlo. Tenemos que tratar de no robar por lo menos 2 años en este país y los empresarios y todos los especuladores deben entender, si no nos sacamos este país adelante.
The Union Caste, a partner of the political caste and complicit in the country's situation, is the one that, feeling threatened by changes that would take away the privileges of providing each employee with the freedom to choose their union affiliation and medical coverage, has already staged the first strike barely 45 days after the new government took office, even though they did not take any protest measures against the previous government with whom they share common interests of maintaining power at the expense of society. Another mask of the caste falls and is exposed. We have seen that part of the caste is in the political class, another part in the media and militant journalists, and also in the union structure. But we need to identify more threads of this web of hidden benefits and, above all, know where they obtain the funds with which they finance themselves, in addition to the corruption already uncovered in politics and unions. We will delve into the darkest details of financing and discover more hidden faces of the caste, which for years Argentines have known exists, but have never been as exposed as they are now. It is important to connect the dots of various situations that, despite existing for decades, gradually reveal the complex framework through which the caste appropriates taxpayers' resources, to which new taxes are always added for their benefit and continuity. The different budgets that the government has contain items for many concepts that most members of society are unaware of or do not have access to. The executive power, each ministry, the chambers of deputies and senators themselves, the autonomous entities of the state, the departments, the state-owned companies, and even each official have the power to have advisors, people on their payroll, and even contracted services that hide the base of a true iceberg of expenses in which politics is financed and public funds are extracted for their own benefit. Just to illustrate, consider the case of the La Plata legislature, where a Peronist activist was found with more than 50 debit cards of supposed employees who are actually listed on the payroll but never went to work, and their salaries are withdrawn from ATMs to be whitewashed and returned to the caste members who pocket the money, so that it does not seem like an unbalanced report, and to make it clear that the caste is a concept that transcends party ideology. In the same La Plata legislature, a couple was also found making withdrawals from 36 debit cards of supposed employees, but this time they belonged to the Radical Party. This proves that it is a common, habitual, and permanent maneuver carried out with the knowledge, complicity, and silence of traditional political parties that pose as adversaries to capture votes, but are actually partners and live off the same thing. The existing controls to prevent such scandalous fraud maneuvers are ignored because there is a pact of complicit silence. In just 1 month, $7,500,000 is stolen from the institution that represents the citizens of the city of La Plata under the concept of non-existent employees. This figure must be added to labor costs. Despite overwhelming evidence, the Argentine judiciary does not advance, so it is not unreasonable to think that the ties of the caste have ramifications in that power. The general public is unaware of the situation and the details. Examples such as the trip of former Mayor Insaurralde to Europe and the scandal of the yacht with a model clearly show that the enrichment of politicians is done with the complicity and silence of most members of the political class. Another pact of silence that managed to come to light is the number of public employees from all over the country who, in addition to their salary, had been assigned a potencia trabajo plan to unlawfully receive 2 salaries, taking money from taxes that should rightly go to promoting employment. In these assistance plans created by different governments, there were the bases for extracting more funds from a passive society and taxpayers filled with impotent resignation. To confront such a hidden and powerful caste, which has been perfecting its methods of state emptiness for years, sovereign powers are needed that can be above those who authorize these budgets, that endorse pre-calculated deviations and controls that are not carried out by the agencies themselves, nor by the General Auditing Office of the nation, and motivate the executive power to be granted the necessary powers to cut off these spurious financings that steal money from taxpayers. The caste resists, arguing that it is preserving the rights of citizens while taking advantage of them with the passivity of a society that does not have access to information because the media live off what generates the social rift that Argentinians have. Is this rift real or also a strategy of the caste? And the situation in which Argentina finds itself, despite the conceptual differences in the model of the country held by its population, the only clear and true divide is between those who work and contribute to society and those who seek to live off others while maintaining their unjustified privileges, thereby hindering the country's growth. The majority of the population has finally managed to elect a president who can identify them and stand against them. The argument used by the elite, who always shield themselves behind the population to go unnoticed, is that they are defending their rights. Another example is provided by a report from our channel in which the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, through an exceptional law that restricted the freedom of movement for Salvadorans, was able to imprison the feared gangs and restore real freedom to citizens, bringing back peace to the streets. He was even re-elected with 85% of the votes. But if you thought we were done, stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. We will show in detail the main sources of funding for the elite and the operators they use to achieve this. If we carefully observe what happened in the Chamber of Deputies regarding the submission of the base law, or so-called Omnibus, for congressional consideration, we will see that in the arduous parliamentary work that mobilized all political forces until the collapse of the bill, it ended up revealing how interest drew a dividing line that allowed for the identification of those who opposed it and those who would support it. The deputies made grand speeches, and the debate enriched the project itself, but the reality of the motivations behind them became evident when even those who had previously agreed changed their votes when their interests were touched. With this clear signal that they support everything except certain clauses of the bill, the president ordered its withdrawal and return to committee. He even later disseminated a list of deputies through his network, labeling them as allies or traitors. Why did the bill really collapse if there was supposed prior agreement? The real problem arose when in the Chamber of Deputies, they reached Clause H of Article 4 of the bill, which delegated to the president the power to decide and dispose of trusts and fiduciary funds from the budget, causing the process to collapse. Argentina, according to the Congressional Budget Office, has so-called fiduciary funds with annual allocations ranging from USD 8,000 to USD 10,000 million, mostly destined to subsidize energy and transportation or to finance public works, but which do not report the details of the transfers made to beneficiaries, whether public or private. The reality is that these are the real black boxes of the elite, and they were not going to relinquish them. The fiduciary funds turned out to be the evidence the government needed to know the position of each legislator regarding the interests they truly represent, generating the surprise that deputies from the same party voted against it, and deputies from other parties realized that it was an opportunity to revitalize the country's productive matrix. President Milei ordered the withdrawal of the bill and exposed those he considers traitors, while thanking the allies. For the past 3 decades, the main source of funding for the Argentine political class has always been ANSIs, PAMI, and the Fiduciary funds, which, without oversight, were used to influence the wills of governors and mayors. That was the red line that the policy rejected, allowing the government to identify members of the elite. The consequences came swiftly. The president requested the resignation of officials who had any kind of connection with governors, who ordered voting against the measure, and decreed that budget allocations to the provinces comply strictly with the revenue-sharing law, removing any additional resources and forcing adjustments in each district. It is the first time that an Argentine president denounces the government's financing channels to which he himself belongs. All previous presidents used these channels to discipline governors and mayors and align them with their cause. The national government's cross-party appeal was nothing more than a checkbook. That's the harsh reality, but depending on the interests of the media and the members of the elite embedded in them, they will propose other explanations to keep the public opinion deceived and never understand the origin of national impoverishment, despite having such a large budget allocated for the state to lead the country to growth. If you followed us this far, we ask you to keep reading, because we will detail at least the main trusts that have been operating for decades with scarce or non-existent official controls and are used to finance projects, alleviate emergencies, and shady purposes. If the country wants to grow and move forward, it must know this information, spread it, and share it, so that all Argentine citizens, especially taxpayers, know where their tax money is going and who is appropriating it. Currently, there are 29 trusts that concentrate an annual budget close to $1.5 trillion, about 2 percentage points of the country's gross domestic product, GDP, all according to data from the Treasury Secretariat of the Ministry of Economy of the nation and the Congressional Budget Office. But since access to information is not so transparent, these are estimated figures. The few official data available only show that 24 of these trusts transferred 1,125,816,922,615 pesos, that is, just over 1 trillion pesos, during the first 9 months of 2023. Most of it is theoretically allocated to finance specific public works or subsidize energy and transportation, but the trust package includes everything. From better-known funds like Procrear for the construction of family homes or hydraulic infrastructure, to socio-urban integration, fire management, Argentine wheat stabilizer, provincial development, or ovine activity recovery, among others. These and other funds operate under the auspices of the Nación, BNA, Argentine Development, BIS, and Hipotecario banks with scarce or non-existent controls. The General Syndicate of the Nation, SIGEN, and the General Audit Office of the Nation, AGN, only audited 12 of them over the past decades, some only once and more than 10 years ago, while the direct responsible parties for several trusts withhold even basic management data that should be publicly available, including from the Treasury Secretariat. In case it wasn't clear, we reiterate. In 9 months of 2023, a budget close to $1.5 trillion was transferred without destination control or accountability. The elite has that money to spend at their discretion without explaining anything to anyone. Argentina urgently needs to be able to stop this. Do you want to know why Argentina isn't growing? It's a mystery to know how that 1.5 trillion pesos from the non-financial public sector are spent. even the composition of their boards of directors, their personnel rosters, how they were selected, which companies each trust hired, and how they were evaluated or how the items were allocated, and why, among other unanswered questions, are unknown and not publicly accessible. Could a government official divert funds to go with a model to Europe and enjoy the Mediterranean Sea on a private yacht without the maneuver being identified? With these discretionary funds, all that and much more is possible. This informational opacity was exposed in the most recent report on trust funds that the Congressional Budget Office released in January 2023. Not all trustees report the details of the transfers they make to beneficiaries, whether public or private, it's stated. It is known, however, that trust funds often report positive balances, and this was even the case in years when public accounts ended in the red. But instead of transferring their surpluses to general revenues to reduce the fiscal deficit and thus limit national monetary issuance or indebtedness, those surpluses remained within the funds. In other words, they kept the money without even helping to offset the national deficit. If you're still not angry and haven't stopped the video being played, we'll give you more details about what these funds are and how much money they move. If you're another Latin American follower, look for information on these funds in your country. The elite is international and employs the same methods. Some countries even designed formats to capture these fugitive capitals by providing banking secrecy, as demonstrated by WikiLeaks. The 9 Argentine trusts that transferred the most money between January and September 2023 did so for more than $997.005 billion, as follows. For the Transportation Infrastructure System, FFCIT, it transferred $417.398 billion during that period, with the Ministry of Transportation as the implementing authority and BNA as the fiduciary entity. Created in 2001, it seeks to promote the development of the national road infrastructure. For social housing, Fogaviso, it transferred $165.482 billion during that period under the Ministry of Territorial and Habitat Development and with BICE as the fiduciary. Created in 2016, its goal is to finance ongoing social housing programs and basic infrastructure. For the subsidy to residential consumption of liquefied petroleum gas, Law 26.020, it transferred $98.260 billion during the analyzed period, under the auspices of the Undersecretariat of Hydrocarbons of the Ministry of Economy, with BICE as the fiduciary. Created in 2005, it aims to guarantee access to liquefied petroleum gas, LPG, at differential prices to low-income users. Procrear, it transferred $82.715 billion during the period under scrutiny under the Ministry of Territorial and Habitat Development, with the Hipotecario Bank as the fiduciary. Created in 2012, its goal is to facilitate access to housing for the population and generate employment as policies for economic and social development. Productive Development, FONDEP, it transferred $58.489 billion during the analyzed period under the Ministry of Territorial and Habitat Development and with BICE as the fiduciary. Created in 2016 to finance projects that promote investment in strategic sectors for the country's economic and social development, as well as activities with high technological content and the generation of greater added value in regional economies. Socio-Urban Integration, FESU, it transferred $58.010 billion during the same period under the Ministry of Territorial and Habitat Development and with BICE as the fiduciary. It began operating in 2021 to preserve the fiduciary ownership of properties identified in the National Registry of Popular Neighborhoods, RENABAP, and others considered necessary or convenient to promote socio-urban integration, including those owned by the national state, provinces, or municipalities that are ceded for that purpose. Residential gas consumption, Law 25.565, it transferred $52.334 billion during the analyzed period under the Secretariat of Energy of the Ministry of Economy, with BNA as the fiduciary. Created in 2001, it aims to compensate gas rates in Patagonia, the Puna, and the Malagu Department and finance the sale of cylinders, bottles, or liquefied petroleum gas, propane gas sold in bulk, and others in those regions and departments. Hydraulic infrastructure. It transferred $49.906 billion during that period under the Ministry of Public Works, with BNA as the fiduciary. Created in 2001 to develop hydraulic infrastructure projects that allow the recovery of productive lands, mitigate floods in rural areas, and the drainage and protection of road and railway infrastructure in rural and peri-urban areas, in addition to compensating the tariff decreases faced by concessionaires performing dredging and maintenance of waterways. Universal service. It transferred $14.406 billion during the analyzed period under the orbit of the Chief of Staff, with BICE as the fiduciary. Created in 2014 to finance the universal provision of information and communication technologies, ICT services, guaranteeing access regardless of their geographical location. We know it's a lot of information, but in any case, it will remain available for later consultation because we're not done yet. The elite is very well funded, and since no one controls it, its invisible power has made it stronger every year. In addition to the funds detailed above, there are another 15 smaller ones that transferred more than $28.811 billion during the same period. For the environmental protection of forests, $8,500 million. For federal electric transport, $6,687 million. Network of highways and safe routes, $2,884 million. Fire management, $2,803 million. Regional infrastructure, $2,237 million. Airport security, $1,039 million. Agribusiness, $1,000 million. And promotion of scientific and technical, $885 million. Also, funds for the promotion of the knowledge economy, $802 million. Distributed energy generation, $665 million. Entrepreneurial capital development, $601 million. Recovery of ovine activity, $320 million. Provincial development, $209 million. Argentine guarantees, $151 million. And direct assistance to victims of trafficking, $12 million. To these are added other funds with no available data on money movement during 2023. These are funds that transferred money, and there is no information of any kind about them, called social capital, mortgage refinancing, universal health coverage, Argentine wheat stabilizer, renewable energies, and national emergencies. It is urgent that Argentine society demands that control be taken over the network of trust funds to correct and make it transparent. But just like the federal co-participation system, they are currently opaque boxes from which resources leave without knowing the destination. In the Argentine political spectrum, there is a variety of parties that have disputed power and alternated in it. But despite the differences they profess, all agreed to continue this perverse mechanism of abuse of power for their own benefit, turning them into true parasitic partners who drain a society that deserves a better future. Everything remained the same until Milei appeared, a true miscalculation on the part of the elite.
Pero sí que te llegue este mensaje que estás equivocado. Eres un error en la historia de Argentina, Milei. Eres un error en la historia de América Latina, Milei. Un error fatal en la historia de Argentina.
It should be noted that Milei is not a traditional leader, as we have been saying in other reports. He does not come from politics and does not care about anything other than fulfilling the government plan for which he took office. He cannot be evaluated with traditional political criteria, and we see that even the Argentine media try to classify, qualify, or predict him according to political criteria and rules, but he does not respond to those models. However, the Milei shown is so transparent that it is shocking for many sectors, but it is much easier to anticipate, predict, and visualize for a simple reason. He says what he thinks and does what he says he will do. He does not engage in political speculation, at least not at the moment, and is strictly adhering to what he said he came to do. His objective is so clear, and he has expressed it so many times that it is striking that he is not being taken seriously, and attempts are made to negotiate, agree, persuade, or whatever is called in politics, to insist on pressures to achieve modifications. The case is simple. He presented a government plan for consideration by the Argentine electorate, and they chose him. Well, it seems that he is going to fulfill it. He does not discuss the fiscal surplus with anyone and is heading towards achieving it. While political forces are immersed in a permanent debate with the help of his economic team, he has already overcome the most complicated barriers of the shock. The political class in general, including deputies, senators, governors, and mayors, seems not to fully understand that the declared priority of the national government is to straighten out the accounts. Thus, they continue with the same government structures as always without making cuts in their government budgets, in which they should already be anticipating an obvious cut that will limit the funds from the nation to the provinces to strictly what is committed by law. This will be the same for provincial governments and municipalities, strictly respecting the country's federalism. Everything seems to indicate that there will be no additional funds, and if they are transferred, prior project and subsequent accountability will be required, leaving no room for any further opportunities for corruption by officials. The elite, as it is already known in Argentina, must disappear, and this transparency movement must reach all countries in the region. And if governors and members of the two chambers of Congress intend to negotiate the approval of laws in exchange for funds or agreements that imply some form of protectionism for sectors or companies in their region, everything seems to indicate that they will encounter refusals until they adopt a model of public austerity and transparency in the management of their funds. Nor will they be given positions as some deputies who claim to be dialogue-oriented and seek a place in the government to respond to their party's interests. Everything is being exposed. Amidst the adjustment, and while everyone is focused on day-to-day matters, Argentina begins to have indicators in its macroeconomy that allow for a more predictable future. The Central Bank of the Argentine Republic managed to accumulate USD 7.000 billion, faced the first payment of debt commitments with the IMF, controlled the LELIX, and no longer issues money without backing. The hyperinflationary impulse left by the previous government has been controlled, and January's inflation was lower than December's. It is speculated that the same will happen with February, despite the abrupt price adjustment due to subsidy removal. The present is tough, and society's effort is significant, but the economic cleanup shock promised in the electoral campaign is being fulfilled, and fiscal balance is no longer a distant goal. The national government must make a consolidated adjustment of 15% of GDP, while the sum of all provinces is only equivalent to 1%, and they will have to do it under the pressure of the strong cut of Milei's chainsaw. The macroeconomy is straightening out, but it is important not to forget that the problem was caused by an economic model that generated more expenses than it had income, and a political network that sustained the model because they benefited from it. If the elite is deprived of the economic resources with which they sustain themselves in a reality full of privileges, domestic economy will normalize through the action of the market itself, which has already diluted wages and pensions, is heading to balance the state's accounts, and now has to start to restore salaries, reduce taxes, and reactivate the economy. There is no effort of prediction in this. It is simply what Milei announced as a government plan, and he is fulfilling it despite the obstacles that the different sectors that the elite has to control society are putting in his way. If in Argentina they voted for Milei, who detailed what he would do, what did they expect? He is an economist and does not seem to be a person who has any doubts about the economic direction. And if economic theory works, not only will he achieve his goal of recovering the country from the abyss it was left in, but he will also generate a seismic shift in historically rooted political parties, such as radicalism and Peronism, which continue with an ideological anchor in an idyllic past. In 2 years, Argentina has mid-term elections, and if political forces do not expel all the elite that inhabits them, the chambers of deputies and senators will be left with an overwhelming majority of La Libertad Avanza congressmen, reducing the opposition to a minority as insignificant as the Legislative Assembly of El Salvador with the overwhelming leadership of Nayib Bukele. Argentines seem to be aware that this time they cannot miss the opportunity to generate a sustainable change of course, and are enduring with stoicism an adjustment that is costly and painful. If they realize that their enemy is the historical elite that impoverished them and fight against it, they will see that there is no gap or great ideological differences, only workers and parasites. The elite is cornered, and after the recovery of the economy, the time will surely come for the judiciary, which is so indebted to Argentine society.